How's it going, folks? Stu here. Today is a special day, guys. It's a big occasion because I bring you a review for a film which I feel like I've been waiting 27 years for. I feel like turning up to the party a week late, like I feel like, does anyone care about what we've got to say anymore? But I got things to say, my guys. So we're gonna say them. We're gonna scream at the one guy that's still interested. So Pearl, it is the prequel to Ti West's X, which, if you didn't catch it, was an awesome little throwback slasher flick about a porno being filmed on a ranch in somewhere. I can't remember. It's a while since I've seen that film. And this one is much more of a sort of character study look at the antagonist, I guess you want to call it, from X. But this is definitely a film which I think can get altered and hindered by expectations in many ways, especially coming out of X and being a big fan of X going into this. And that's because it's a very different film to X, I think, in what it's trying to do and how it's trying to do it, despite being in that same universe from the same talent and creatives and being about the same characters we've seen in X. But X was much more of a kind of story ensemble-driven slasher film through and through. There's much more, I guess, flesh to it in that sense, and it's much more about the fun and entertainingness of a slasher. Whereas this one is much more honed in on a specific character, and so as such it's less, I think, about the big things that are happening as a narrative in the film. It's much less of a slasher, I guess, in that sense, and more of just kind of spending an hour and a half diving deep into the psyche of a specific woman in the form of Pearl. And I think understanding that intentional difference there is the key to appreciating Pearl on its own right, aside from X, because I guess in many ways you could sort of look at the two and go, well, one isn't doing what the other one was doing enjoyably there, so it's lesser or better off in that sense. I'm not sure that's the best way to look at these two films, because in many ways they are obviously two of the same piece, but they are interestingly sort of two different approaches, which I quite like seeing. I like seeing creatives that are willing to change things up and do things differently. And I think Pearl does enough really differently to X to set it aside but still not feel like it's an entirely different film, which is, I feel like, a somewhat difficult thing to get right often from directors and writers, especially I guess in the horror genre. Like, it's very commendable that Ti West didn't just go, this is the things that everyone liked about X, let's just do that again more. You sort of disarmed, I suppose, when it comes to how the tension and the horror is going to weave itself in. In the first act, I was sort of like, I don't know how this is going to be, like, effectively scary and stuff. Maybe it's not even trying to do that. But Ti West still weaves those things in a really interesting way. There's still moments of tension, just different tension, which is nice. It's a refreshing feeling to get going into the second film in, I guess, a trilogy here. But I can't believe I haven't gone this long in a review without talking about the performance, which is so crucial and so integral to this film, because the entire film follows Pearl, who is played by Mia Goth here, reprising a role from X. And it is just a completely unhinged performance. I mean, she's spoken a bit about her influence in here, which do absolutely scream through the film. I mean, specifically things like Betty Davis in Whatever Happened to Baby Jane. I mean, that performance is just constantly there through Mia Goth. But she is just, I mean, come on, she is stupidly watchable. I love her as an actress. I've loved her in pretty much everything she's done, but I just feel like in this role, it does really feel like she is just completely alive within it, and she's just having, I guess, the time of her life really on screen. There are kind of few things on a performance level as engrossing and absorbing as watching a performer just completely throw themselves into a role. And regardless of what you think about the film coming out of it, I feel like it's impossible to disagree that Mia Goth is going for it. She's really going for it. There's some crazy shit in here that is so deeply uncomfortable and yet still entirely watchable and impossible to look away from, which is a really specific line to dance as a performer, and she does it for an hour and a half straight, really. I really can't fault her performance, to be honest, here much throughout this film, and it's in many ways the crucial piece of the film. It's the thing which makes this film work. It's a very make or break piece of the puzzle here. If you don't have a performance like that, everything else about the film begins to fall flat a little bit. And I do think there are elements of the film which do threaten to fall flat in many ways, and I think overall I don't know if on first watch I was as entertained and absorbed by the film as I was X, but maybe that's just because I'm such a slasher fan. There is a feeling with Pearl like you're watching an extended joke and punchline, if that makes much sense. And that's not to suggest that this whole film is just laughing. It's not a joke. It takes itself seriously enough to work, but it does feel like, in terms of what it's saying and doing, it is more or less the same throughout. And that can sometimes give it this feeling of spinning its wheels a little bit when you know so clearly what it's trying to do so early on. But that really isn't as much of a problem as I guess that might sound like it is as I'm explaining it to you guys. I think it threatened to be more of a problem than it ended up being as the film went on. In much the same way that the performance here feels crucial to the film's sort of character-driven approach, the look of this thing feels crucial to what it ends up saying and doing thematically. It's got an incredibly saturated and vibrant feel as a film, just immediately, just the grass and the color and everything, not just because we saw it so, you know, degraded in the first one, but it really hones in and narrows in on that kind of Wizard of Oz sort of early Hollywood era feel. And that tone and look and atmosphere has a place rooted within the themes of the film as well, and what the film ends up doing in its screenplay. And having just said that, overall it's not a film which is just taking the piss out of itself. It takes itself seriously enough to work. It is surprisingly a film which has a lot more comedy in it than I expected. Ti West and Mia Goth, who wrote the film together, they do have a really good understanding of how the tension and the horror aspects and the sort of absurdity and the comedy aspects are in a sort of tug and pull relationship with each other. And I think that dynamic is what makes the film's sort of tone and screenplay so dynamic and engaging throughout. It's a really satisfying sort of upwards curve to a climax which just feels so unforgettable, really. There's like, I think like a 10-minute long monologue delivered by Mia Goth towards the end of this thing, which is just sort of stupidly impressive on a technical standpoint, but also from just a sheer keeping your audience engaged standpoint. Like, if you're going to give yourself a 10-minute monologue that rarely cuts away from the person talking, you got to hope that you're doing it well enough for people not to just clock out. And it is, yeah, very, very absorbing stuff. Overall, I'm just really satisfied with this film. There's a lot of seriously good stuff going on here, and I don't know if it's quite as sort of well-rounded a piece as X was for me, and in that sense I'm not sure after a first watch that I enjoy it as much as X, but it's definitely a worthwhile addition to the trilogy, and I like what it ends up doing as a prequel and what it ends up adding to the characters that we know from this world at this point anyway. And it's left me incredibly excited to see what they end up doing with the next one, which is not a prequel, it is a sequel to X. So I'm interested to see what they do differently there, whether they sort of land in between what they've done with X and Pearl, or whether they do an entirely new, different approach to it as well. It would be very interesting to see. But what about you guys? Have you seen Pearl, and what did you think about it? I know you will have seen it if you're out in the States by this point. You probably can't even remember what you thought about it because it was so long ago. But if you're catching it over here in the UK when it releases, do let me know what you thought about it in the comments down below. We'll have a little chat. I'd love to know where you think it lands in the kind of X or Pearl. Not that we need to play the two together. Maybe you enjoyed both equally. I don't know. Let me know in the thoughts down below. Of course, while you're down there as well, if you enjoyed this video and you want to see me talk about more shit, go ahead and click subscribe. The button is down there, as well as a bunch of links to my socials and a 30-day free trial code for MUBI, which is always fun. I'm telling you, best streaming service, and I'm not just saying that because I've worked with them before. I will, of course, see you guys soon for some more thoughts on more films, but until next time, I feel like we need to just get Mia Goth a hug or something. Like, yeah, just get the woman a hug, and maybe a pack of tissues.